On this episode, we talk a little bit about what's happening in the upcoming Season 3, because guess what? Evo's leaving, but don't worry, we got a replacement.
There is a plan, a man, and a canal, Panama, which has nothing to do with, but you'll be listening to, the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who washed up on Thailand's shores in 2001 and has remained here washing up ever since.
And I am Evo Terra, an American expat who soon will have lived full-time in the Big Mango for 2 years, 2 months, and 11 days, or 114 weeks and 4 days, or 802 days, or 69,292,800 seconds. But who's counting?
Well, I don't know how I can follow that, but my name is Ed Knuth. I'm an American who came to Thailand on a 1-year teaching contract 17 years ago. Thanks for joining all three of us as we record this episode of the Bangkok Podcast live at Jack's Bar on the beautiful, pristine Chao Phraya River.
So on this episode, we wanted to do a little bit of a preview of things to come, kind of a, what do they call that story with Ebenezer Scrooge, a Christmas Carol kind of thing? This is a Christmas Carol version of a Bangkok story, or the other way around, whatever it is. Well, as you heard last week, listeners, Evo's time in Bangkok is drawing to a close, unfortunately. And while this week's episode is not the last episode you will ever hear him on, we did think it would be fun to give you a preview of how things will look for the third season of the Bangkok Podcast.
But I reiterate, today is not the day that I record my last episode as co-host of the Bangkok Podcast. I don't actually leave the country for another month, and I still have a few opinions to share and topics to cover before my time, more importantly my typo non-immigration visa, in the kingdom expire.
So this is probably as good a time as any to reintroduce the audience to my friend Ed, a voice you first heard back on episode 65 just about a month ago. If you remember, Ed and I discussed the mysterious nature of the Thai smile, one of our most popular recent episodes actually. So ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the Bangkok Podcast, I introduce you to my friend and your co-host for the third season of the Bangkok Podcast, which is upcoming, Mr. Ed Knuth. Ed, welcome, man.
Wow, thank you very much. Once again, I will say I'm happy to be here. Some of you may have heard me a few weeks ago, about a month ago or something like that.
Yeah.
In my debut. Glad to be back. I wanted to just kind of reintroduce myself. I have been in Thailand for about 17 years. I did actually come here expecting to be here for a year. And the funny thing is I had a year-long contract. And when I got here, a year seemed so long that I insisted that my company reduce it to only a 6-month contract.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's how self-aware I was. That's how much I knew myself at that point.
I know you want me for a whole year, but lay off, please.
Seriously.
I'm only available for 6 months.
Let's get serious. A year? You want me to stay here for a year?
That's funny.
So we reduced it to 6 months, and that was in 2000. So I've never left, of course. I've left to visit back home, but I stayed here. I teach at Thammasat University. I'm married to a Thai woman, beautiful Thai woman. And what else about me do you need to know? I've mostly worked teaching jobs, but I've been teaching at Thammasat for about 8 years now. So
let's reiterate, when you say you're a teacher, you mean a real teacher, because we did do a show with Evo's lovely wife, Sheila D, a while ago.
What, she's not a real teacher?
She's a real teacher. I am not. And that's where the discrepancy was, because we talked about the difference between my experience teaching in Bangkok as a layabout, shiftless Farang who knew English as my sole qualifying factor for being a teacher.
That was a shockingly good description of yourself.
That's pretty good, eh?
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, you know yourself.
I
really.
left out bald and tubby, otherwise that would be spot on. But Evo's wife is actually a real teacher, much like yourself, who teaches at a real institution. So, you're a real teacher at a real place.
Yeah, I guess if you put the word real in quotes, then yeah, that would be accurate.
Like the place we're sitting at right now, where it says wine by, quote, glass. I don't know what that means. And by the way, listener, if you can't tell, we're recording this episode remotely, so we're not in the, quote unquote, studio that we normally record in, but we're actually sitting on the shores, banks, edge of the mighty Chao Phraya River.
Technically, we're above the river, Greg. We're
right above the river, yeah. As Evo mentioned in the bonus episode, which we just finished recording, the river is actually right below us, between the slats of some nailed-together plywood. We're at a little dive bar called Jack's, one of our favorite hangouts, and we thought this would be a fun place to have some dinner, have some beers, and record this episode where we talk a little bit about Ed. Now, Ed, You have a very similar story to me, in that you came here expecting to be here temporarily. 17 years later, you're still here. You're married. You've settled down. So let's talk about this a little bit. I can't remember the first time we met, but it was a long time ago. Can you shed any light on that for me?
I'm not sure I remember the very first time we met. I think it was through our mutual friend Trevor of what is this podcast called again?
He's got a podcast called Talk Travel Asia.
That's
which
right,
is a great
Talk Travel
podcast
Asia.
about travel.
Trevor Ranges, travel expert. I think we might have met through Trevor somehow, or I met you at a party, something like that. Who knows?
Trevor's the only guy I know who's like a professional surfer. Not like Kelly Slater. He's another way to phrase that. He's like a professional Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and he's a great guy. That's not meant in a derogatory way.
Fairly accurate.
But he's a surfer, and he spends a lot of time in Hawaii, and he's back and forth all over the place doing fun
No, but
stuff.
he is a consummate traveler. Whereas I just moved here and I pretty much just stay here.
Yeah, me too.
I
So
don't
we're
do
very
much.
similar in that respect.
Yeah.
But
But on this whole issue, we were thinking about talking about this issue of short time expats. That has more meaning than like more than one meaning versus long term expats. And I ended up being a long term expat, but I never thought I would do that. I did not expect it.
Well, I think a lot of these things aren't completely planned. I mean, did you have a plan, Ed, when you showed up in Thailand 17 years ago? No. You said, this is such a short-term thing for me, cut my contract in half because that's way too long.
That is correct.
I know, Greg, when you showed up here 16 years ago, it was simply on a vacation and you just forgot to go home. So it wasn't like either of you guys had a big plan to get here. When I showed up here on December, and I went back and looked, it was December 28th, 2015, when I showed up here in Thailand, it was also without much of a plan other than, well, I'm out of money, and I know that my wife, professional educator, can get a really good job in Bangkok, so let's just try out Bangkok for a while. But with us, with Sheila and I, the idea was always that we would only be here. This was not a potential long-term destination. This was always a spot we might do for a year or two.
So you actually had a plan and you stuck to it.
I guess we're not that. Yes, you're right.
So you don't belong here.
I have to get out. That's why I'm leaving.
so you're not actually a quitter. You're actually sticking to the plan that you originally had set.
That's boring. That's so boring.
Just realize how awesome I am at following through on things. Someone tell my mom that I finally followed through on something for once in my life. She'll be so amazed. So I am short term, and I think that being a short term expat probably gives me a little.
I prefer the phrase short time expat. Short time.
Yeah, short time. Right. Why would you use short?
No. You can't say short time expat. That's got all kinds of negative connotations after living here for so long.
That cost you 1,500 baht for a short time expat. And if you don't know what we're talking about, listener, look up short time. You might want to look up GFE while you're at it too. Anyhow, we'll continue the conversation.
So that makes me a long time expat.
yeah. Yours is 2,500 baht.
So I've been married for 10 years. That's a long time.
That is a very, very long time.
That's a long time.
That's a really, really long time. But I think that being a short-termer like me probably gives me a little bit different understanding and expectations. And I guess it is, against you two guys that have been here forever, that you are probably much more able to handle the insanity of living in Bangkok and dealing with the stuff that just naturally comes up than I am. Or maybe it's just because I'm really, really a short timer that it's starting to get to me more and more. I don't know. But do you wake up just railing at the life?
It's a good question. One of my friends here, a semi-mentor, a guy who was here before I got here, I remember him telling me that one of the fascinating things about Thailand is that every couple of years he feels like he understands what's going on. And then a year later, he's back in like a sea of confusion, not understanding everything. So it kind of comes and goes. Your grasp of the environment kind of comes and goes.
That's interesting because I think a similar thing happens to how much you love living here. Because most of the time, I'm like, oh, this is great. And we've talked about on the podcast before how simply going outside and getting on a motorcycle taxi is really cool from a Western perspective. Thais would think that's really boring, but you go through long stretches of like, this is great. I wake up and it's warm. I see palm trees everywhere. The food is delicious. But then you dip and it goes down to an area where you're like, I hate Thai food. I hate Thai people. I hate this country. I hate everything about it. And then it goes back up to like, this is actually pretty good. So it's dips and hills and peaks
Yeah,
and
that's
valleys.
true. I mean, in general, I really would not have stayed so long if I didn't really like it. I mean, I'm not one of those. I'm definitely not one of those bitter expats who seems to, for some reason, hate Thailand but still stays here. I'm definitely not one of those guys.
Right, like those barstool knobs who sit
Yeah,
there and
like-
tell you, let me tell you what's really happening. Oh, really? You know, do you? With your Chang singlet and you're drunk at 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Bloated face.
In general, I love Thailand. Or I should say this. In general, I love living here. In general, I mean,
Yeah.
I've got my complaints, and it's not perfect, but I wouldn't stay here if I didn't like it.
Let me ask you a question. And this is a difficult question, so you might not have an answer right away because I don't even really have an answer and I know what I'm going to ask. Was there a particular moment where you said, I'm no longer a traveler or a tourist. I'm an expat. This is my home now.
It's a good question. I mean, in my case, it's only really, it sounds crazy since I've been here 17 years, but it's only been the last few years that I've really accepted the fact that I'm like a long-term expat.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've been in denial the whole time. I've been in denial because like every year that I stayed here, I always thought was going to be my last until probably like year 13.
Right. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's weird. Like I was always in denial. I'm like, I'll probably go back next year, or maybe in 2 years. And it really just depended on how my life was going and what was going on in my personal life, my career. And it's only the last, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years ago that I was like, oh my God, like I could be a lifer.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a new thing. It's this only new thing for me.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I might never go back. That's so strange.
Well, so here's what's strange for me, as the short-termer that's here, I grabbed hold of that expat idea right away. I mean, my first year leaving America was definitely traveling, 13 countries, 3 continents. We were really, really travelers. But when we moved to expat, when we moved to Bangkok, says the second Sing beer of the night, the idea was to be expats. That's what we wanted to be. But it wasn't, being an expat for us wasn't, we'll be expats living in Bangkok forever. To us, it was, we'll be expats currently in Bangkok for a couple of years, and then we'll be expats in, I don't know, Hong Kong? I don't know.
That's
Spain?
great.
I don't know.
That's a great
somewhere else in
lifestyle.
the world.
That is a great lifestyle.
That was the idea. And then reality set in.
Well, let me ask you one more question, Ed, about this. When you came to Thailand, was it specifically Bangkok or Thailand that you were going to? Like, were you drawn here for any particular reason? Or was this just a place you ended up? Because for me, I ended up in Bangkok, and I ended up thriving here. But I think I probably could have, if I had gone to Moscow or Santiago or Yokohama or whatever, I probably could have thrived there too. Was there any specific thing about Thailand or Bangkok that made you come here?
I mean, I came here for a specific reason because I had a job. So, I mean, that's why I came here. So, I mean, I probably would have gone almost anywhere if I had the job opportunity. So, I didn't come to Thailand because of a specific interest in Thailand. I mean, one of my stories I always tell everybody is that I, in the airports, when I caught my plane out here, I bought like a book in the bookstore about Thailand because I was like, oh shit, I better read about this place that I'm going. I bought that book, Culture Shock Thailand.
Was it the terrible one with the cartoon teacher on the beach with talking to some scantily clad university students? God, I hate those cartoons.
No, the Culture Shock series is not bad, but just like I mean, obviously I knew about Thailand. I wasn't. I realized I did actually know the difference between Thailand and Taiwan. I did have that in my education.
A lot of people still don't. Do you ever get people asking you how much Taiwanese you speak?
I personally never had it, but my students tell me this happens when they travel. So,
right.
I don't think it's a myth.
I never really understood why people say, like, I mean, as much as I love Thailand and Bangkok, I never really could connect with people that say I came to Thailand and fell in love with it. Like, I find is that possible? I mean, Evo, you've traveled more than I have. Is that possible to do for a place? I can't imagine ever going to a place and being like, that's it, I want to live here. I guess that would be love, loathe, or live, right? But I can't imagine ever going to a place and just deciding, I'm done, this is it.
Well, I don't know about I'm done, but I understand like falling in love with a place. I mean, for me, I definitely didn't fall in love with the place right away. But I mean, I really like it. That's why I stayed. I mean,
yeah, I think for Sheila and I, we spent 3 months living in Thailand before we decided to make Bangkok our expat home. And there were a lot of things that we certainly did love about the culture just because it was different than what we had in America. I don't know that love. I'm thinking infatuation and interest. It didn't seem like a place that I wanted to be forever, but it was certainly a place where I could spend a good amount of time, and it wouldn't be a bad place to put down roots. But I'm a bad guy to ask this question to because I abhor putting down deep roots. I am the guy that wants to move around from spot to spot to spot. Can I fall in love with any location? I'm polyamorous when it comes to locations. I love a lot.
You backpack slut. Let me ask you this: if you could live in any place forever, if you had to put down roots of a place outside of America, where would it be?
Mars, without a doubt. Definitely Mars.
Okay, specifically Earth-based cities. You love Spain, right? You said you love Spain a lot.
Yeah, Spain was great, but Spain is jacked. I mean, Spain is just a political system that is... You'd be hard-pressed to find a country in the EU that's worse. I guess Greece. Spain's happy that Greece is still in the EU, but it's just jacked. And again, that's coming from...
What does jacked mean? What do you mean?
It's just screwed. I mean, the 22% unemployment, there's a massive amount of political turmoil, people don't know what they're wanting to be, and that's all has to do with Spain's history over the last 100 years. It's a lovely country. I love the people, but it's just a system that is... crazy, and that's based on the whopping 6 weeks I spent there. I'm making this blanket statement about an entire
well, you're an
country.
expert, obviously. You're an expert, obviously.
Clearly, more so than most people, and I speak a little bit of Spanish because I'm an American.
Well, anyway, so once Ivo took me out to a little Thai craft beer place and said he was going to pick up the tab. I knew something was up, and that's when he sprung the news on me that you were leaving. So after I stopped crying, we picked up the pieces and continued on talking. So I figured, the Bangkok podcast, I have a lot of fun doing it. It's really cool. It's a unique thing. And I wanted to continue it going. So I started thinking of, who do I know that's technically proficient, at least technically competent, who has been here a long time, who can comment semi-intelligently on Bangkok, who I have a good rapport with. And I narrowed it down to a couple of names, but I just kept coming back to my old buddy Ed, who I've known for probably 15 years now. And so Ed, I'm glad you were open to the opportunity, and I'm kind of looking forward to where we can take it from here.
I'm very much looking forward to it. I think we're going to have a great season.
So I just want to clarify, is Ed technically competent, or is he competent technically? Which is two very, very different things.
That is true.
He is competent technically, yes.
But I'm technically incompetent.
He knows computers and stuff, yeah. So I think it'll be really interesting, because the way I think of it is sort of like The Wire. Have you seen The Wire?
No.
You've never seen The Wire?
I've never seen The Wire.
Dear Lord.
The Wire is one of the absolute best TV shows in the history of TV. And the really interesting thing about The Wire is, if you don't know, it's 5 seasons.
It is 5 seasons.
And every season is a different aspect of living in Baltimore. The first season is the police department. The second season is the mayor's office. The third season is the port.
Education?
The fourth season is the
yeah.
education.
Yeah,
every season is vastly different from the previous season, although it's contained within the same universe, basically speaking. And I think of the Bangkok podcast like that. Like, the first season was me and my buddy Tony. And we started the podcast, and we had a particular way of doing things. We had a particular voice. We had a particular relationship that came out in the podcast. Season 2 was Evo and I, and it was the same topics and the same place and the same content, but it was a different personality.
Because there's nobody like Evo.
That's right. There's nobody like Evo.
I mean his name. I mean, he's a really normal guy, but his name is very unusual.
It's a strange name. It sounds like a star named by an Arabic astronomer.
Yeah, but his
back
personality
in the 1400s.
is totally like everybody else.
Yeah, that's by design, actually, because we don't want too many of that working around. Like they say, when they made Evo, they broke the mold, and they beat the hell out of the mold maker. But I'm looking forward to season 3, because now with you and me,
yes,
it'll have a whole different attitude.
We're old friends.
We are, yeah.
We've got history.
By the way, you still owe me $2,500 baht from 7 years ago. But
okay,
we'll
not
talk
that
about
history. That's not the history I'm talking about.
But I'm looking forward to it, and I think it'll be fun, because while old friends, we don't spend a lot of time together.
Well, you're married with kids. That tends to ruin your life.
Yeah, that kind of puts a damper on everything. But we also talked about this on an earlier show, I think, about how you can live in this big city and be part of a relatively small community, but you still don't see those communities for a while. I think it was last week's show where we talked about my friend Eric, who passed away, and about how I was thinking, like, oh, next week, I'll call him next week. And he passed away, and I'll never be able to call him again,
Wow.
which is a very sad thought. So you live in these little communities, and you just don't see the people that you really come to care about and respect and are your family, for lack of a better word. So while we haven't spent that much time together over 15 years, but it's still been 15 years.
That is true. It's been a long time. And so we will have a whole season of hanging out together.
Well, I've only got one thing to say to you guys. Turning the reins over to you, Ed, and also back to you again, Greg, and that's just this. Don't f*** it up.
Thank you. Thanks for that advice.
Yeah, that's my only goal.
Thanks for the leadership, the wisdom.
So finishing up here, I just want to talk about why this episode and the next season actually came about. Eva, why the hell are you leaving? Was it something I said?
It was something I said, actually. No, and I've been forced to...
Was it, hey, son, come on a vacation with me?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. So here's the deal, people. I'm going to be a grandfather, which is weird.
That is frightening.
I am way too young to be a grandfather, says the guy who will be 50 years old in 5 months. But nonetheless, yes, my son, NJ, and his girlfriend, Jamara, are expecting, and the child is due on July 28th, and there's no way... I do not live in a universe where my wife will be on a different continent than a grandbaby. So here we go. So we will be ending our life of travel, living abroad. Expats will be coming to an end, at least temporarily, as we relocate ourselves back to America and assume the mantle of Kunpu and Gigi. Those are the names we have picked for each other.
Gigi.
Sheila
like that.
is going to be Gigi, which is as Ukrainian for grandmother, and I am sticking with Kunpu, which in theory is Thai on how that is spelled. So that's why I'm leaving.
Still not happy about it, but it's as good a reason as any, I guess. Yeah. Ed, you have no kids.
I have no kids.
Certainly
so
no grandkids.
That's right. So I've got about 20 years I can host this podcast.
Shit, that's going to be a long season 3. You know, the funny thing about this is that season 1 with me and Tony was about 77 episodes. Season 2 with Evo and I will be about 73 or so episodes.
Wow, that's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, but it's working out to be strangely consistent, and I'm the common thread between both seasons. So you know how light is the universal constant.
That's right.
I think I'm the speed of Somtam as
You
the
are.
universal constant of the Bangkok podcast.
Anyhow, listener, you have not heard the last of me. I still plan on coming back being the foreign correspondent from time to time, talking about what it's like repatriating oneself back in America.
Cool. That's a great story, too.
Yeah, there could be lots of good stuff. So I'm leaving the microphone most of the time in Ed's capable hands, but I will still be involved in the Bangkok podcast as much as I possibly can, so you will hear me more. And there's one other promise I can make to you, and that is that you will still enjoy everyone's favorite portion of the program, and that's a little something we call Love, Loathe, or Leave, where we look at one minor aspect of living in Bangkok and find out if it's something three of us this week love about living in Bangkok, loathe about expat life, or it's something we hate so much that it just might cause us to leave Thailand. And this week, Greg, you have the honors.
I do. It's all on me this week. Now, let me tell you, has this ever happened to you? You go to a meeting, you go to a conference, you go to whatever,
Yeah.
and someone says, would you like some coffee? And you go, yeah, sure, I'd love some coffee. And they pull out a packet of freeze-dried crap and drop it into a cup and pour some boiling water on it.
Get out.
So bad. Love, loathe, or leave.
Hate instant coffee with every fiber of my being. That's not coffee. I don't know how they take this thing and dehydrate it and turn it into some abominable, horrible concoction. No. Instant coffee is rotten all the time.
It just seems to be something that everyone here has and they offer you, and it's supposed to be like an acceptable thing. And there's even commercials about like young, handsome guys whipping up a cup of instant coffee and giving it to the hot girl in the office, and she's like, ooh, freeze-dried coffee. It's disgusting. It's so gross.
I do not like instant coffee even a little bit. Here's the only reason instant coffee should exist, and that's if you're making tiramisu. It is actually an ingredient in tiramisu. Put instant coffee, super finely ground on that. That makes tiramisu that much better. Ed, what do you think about instant coffee?
I've got a super simple opinion. I hate coffee. Period. I don't drink it.
Wow.
It's bizarre because I love the smell of coffee, so
Yeah.
I get it. It's like I grew up in a house where my parents drank coffee every morning, and I woke up to the smell of coffee, and I love it. But then when I taste it, I hate it. So I don't drink coffee at all. Sorry.
So I think we're at loathe on this one. We all three
go.
collectively loathe instant coffee. Well done.
Loathe. That's a triple loathe. Have we ever had one of those before?
I don't know that we've had a triple loathe before, yeah. So again, I need to say thank you very much, or perhaps for the first time on this particular episode, to those who support us on Patreon. We certainly do appreciate your support. You guys get the bonus content where we talked a lot. We got to know a lot more about Ed and Greg and myself and the activities here that we experienced at Jack's Bar today. So if you've not yet signed up for patronage of us, go to patreon.com/Bangkok Podcast and sign up. Support us. A couple of bucks a month makes all the difference in the world. It helps, well, I'll say us now, but in a few weeks, Greg and Ed keep the show going strong. Go to patreon.com/Bangkok Podcast and lend us your support. We really do appreciate it.
And thank you to the listeners a few weeks back who heard my debut and had nice things to say about it. I'm still figuring this out, still getting my sea legs under me, and hopefully this will be a smooth transition. I look forward to speaking with you, the listener, on an ongoing basis as your new co-host, but not next week.
Yeah, I'll be back here next week. We got something fun to say. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but we'll have something amazing.
And thanks to you, of course, for listening to the Bangkok Podcast. If you have something on your mind or you just want to drop us a line to say hello, please leave a comment on bangkokpodcast.com, or you can reach out directly to me on Twitter, where I am BKK Greg.
And hey, I'm still around too. I'm at Evo Terra on the Twitters. And if you want to hear my voice again, although you'll hear me next week, but if you want to subscribe, I still do a podcast with my lovely wife, Sheila D, at shivo.wtf/podcast. Link in the show notes if you want more about me. But hey, this is not about me. This is the outro. It's about the Bangkok Podcast. So you should send us messages on the Facebooks, on the Twitters, online. We're everywhere at Bangkok Podcast. And we're also good at responding to your comments, your questions, and saying thank you for the heaps of praise that you heap upon us. For Greg Jorgensen and Ed Knuth with the TH. See, normally the H is not pronounced in Thailand, but I'll have to learn that one. For Greg, for Ed, I am Evo Terra. We will be back here next week with more stories of our lives lived right here in the City of Angels on the Bangkok Podcast. Choki krap!
Hey, where are you from?
Australia.
Australia. All right, we're recording this episode live at a remote place, and we got these guys at the table next to us who are having some drinks like we are. Is this your first time to Thailand?
This is my first time overseas.
What do you think about it?
It's awesome. It's such an awesome city. And that night, like all the lights, the boats on the water, it's amazing just sitting here having a meal and just looking at it all.